Well, the wings are off. They're loose. This left wing came off pretty easy. Had to knock the bolts out of it, but they just come out pretty easy. The bottom ones down here in the strut were a little harder than the ones up in the wing root, but it came off okay. I raised it up a little bit to get it up out of the way. Oh, the right one, I got a little bit too much angle on it on the outside strap out there, so it didn't get, it had a little bit of tension on it, so it was a little harder to get apart, but we got it apart. So they're hanging there now. So the next thing to do here is unbutton those bolts and stuff for the floats, and then we can sneak that fuselage out of there, get it off the floats and get that belly tank out of there so we can get it cleaned up and get it ready to put on the other fuselage. So, there's the instrument panel sitting there on top of the old boot cowl. I'm going to take it up so we can strip the instruments out of it, use it for a pattern, and I'm going to have to send some of those instruments in to get it rebuilt. We're getting the airplane pretty much disassembled now, the old fuselage. I got the floats off of it this evening. Drug them out of the hangar and then took the belly tank off of the fuselage and got it sitting over there. We can get it cleaned up. The floats came apart pretty easy. Had them apart, oh, what, 3 or 4 years ago, and put all new hardware in them and stuff and greased them up real good. And it makes a big difference when you take them apart once in a while and grease that hardware up with good. Put lots of peralcatone on it to keep it protected. Nothing was rusted up, nothing was froze up. The only problem I had was this one flying wire here that goes from the left side, left float up to the right side of the fuselage. The pin wouldn't come out of it for a while, and we had to raise the airplane up and unscrew the flying wire from the turnbuckle ends, or the ends on it, to get it to come out. But once it turned free, and so there's the old fuselage sitting there on the buckets now, like the new one was for quite a while. Picking it up was kind of a challenge. I went back and hooked on back there on that rear cross member, that rear spar carry-through member, thinking maybe that would be the center point, but it's not. It's back farther than that. So anyway, it was pretty tail heavy. There we go, pieces of an airplane, and it wasn't even a wreck. It was flying when parked. We got the fuselage pretty much all stripped down now. Everything off of it that we can possibly use, and probably a bunch of stuff that we can't use. So we're ready to cart this thing off to its final resting place. Well, I shouldn't say final resting place. I don't know what we're going to do with it, but I got to get it out of here where it's out of the way. Anyway, that is going to get out of here so we have room in here to do something else. I still have to strip the stuff off the boot cowl, off the firewall. I took the struts off of the wings. Uh-oh. There's a good use for it, a roost for a blue jay. Yeah, he'll crap on the floor in there. So anyway, we took the struts off the wings and then winched them up where they're high enough overhead where they're out of the way, not interfering with us in here. And pulled the floats out of here, just stuck them over there for the time being, out of the way. Belly tank's off, it needs to be cleaned up, and then I can start trying to put it on, fit it up underneath the other fuselage and get an idea how to fit it. But there's the old carcass. And just remember, that was flying when it was parked here. It flew in. That one ain't flying out. At least not on its own. We got the hangar cleaned out. got the airframe out of there and the floats out of there. Lots of room on there now. Now we got chairs set up and used it for a party spot. So there's the wings hanging up and the tail feathers and cowling and stuff are up there, as well as some of the other crap. Well, you got lots of room in here now. Get the engine sitting there still on the engine stand. The floats over here sitting alongside out of the way. And there's the fuselage there. Got it up out of the way on top of that trailer. Got most everything stripped off of it that we could salvage, and a lot of stuff that we can't. So we got a few of the things here that came off of the airframe, the old airplane, and so I thought I'd do a biopsy or a autopsy or a necropsy or whatever you want to call it of some of the parts and pieces. Now this is the float attach fittings here for the rear float attach fittings, and we just had those off year before last and cleaned them all up and repainted them, replaced these plates here, and these are in pretty good shape still. There's nothing wrong with these at all. They put a lot of PRC 5200 in here where it clamps against the lower portion of the fuselage, or the fuselage there, so it didn't get water in there between. That caused a lot of problems there with getting the water in between here and the fabric. But otherwise those are in pretty good shape. This one looks a little cruddier, but it's only because it didn't sit in the bath as long and still got a little bit of crap on it. I put a lot of peralkatone on it and stuff to keep it clean, or to keep it from rusting, and anyway, it doesn't look too bad. These are parts that go in the float attach fittings there. This is what the struts attach to here through this triple part, and then this, the flying wire attaches here to this, goes diagonally down to the other side, and then you've got two U-bolts that go through here to hold this on, 1/4 inch U-bolts, and then you've got 3/16 U-bolt that goes through here to hold that on. And, this little bracket here was to route the guide for the water rudder cables through. This attached here underneath the strap for the belly tank, and then the tube that the water rudder retract cable went through into this. And it's just a piece of aluminum, and it's got some corrosion on it. So some of it's paint there, like that's paint, but it's got some corrosion on it. It's not intergranular or anything, it's just surface corrosion, but it's not too pretty, but could probably be reused. These are bolts, are brackets that mounted onto the front forward wing spars at the wing roots for hoisting the airplane, for picking it. Stainless steel welded. They got a little bit of discoloration on there. Rust, I guess. They need to be cleaned up, but they'll be reused. These are the brackets. It's folded stainless steel there with these plastic pulleys in them. These were for the water rudder cables. They were mounted up onto the fuselage. So the screws in here are stainless steel. Now the pins that they went through were steel, and those were in pretty bad shape. They're just clevis pins, and they were pretty rusted, not very pretty at all. And then they just had clamps going through onto the fuselage and the lower longeron stringers, and they weren't very pretty either. But These are reusable. You clean these up and I'll put new bolts in them and or screws in them. But they're serviceable. These are the engine mounts. These bolts are separate. The bolts will be replaced, but the mounts are still in good shape. I had them off a few years ago and powder coated them, and this one's got a little bit of rust on it. Clean those up and repaint them and put new bolts in them, and they'll work just fine. These bolts for the struts, wing struts, where it attaches to the fuselage, they're actually not too bad. They got a little bit of rust on them, but I had them pretty well greased up, and they're not in too bad a shape, but I'll replace those. These clamps here were part of the shoulder harness attachments. They fit over cross tubes in the, well, the forward one fit across the rear spar carry-through member for the forward shoulder harness attachment, and then the rear shoulder harness attachment that attached back a little farther on one of the diagonal struts, and they're in fine shape. These straps, hanger straps for the belly tank, they're stainless steel straps, and this is the one that attaches to the landing gear, the rear landing gear fitting. And these straps, I'll have to clean them up a little bit more and inspect them a little closer, but so far they look like they're in pretty good shape. I got most of the crud off of them. Still got a little bit of crud on them, but they'll clean up. And I don't know whether they're going to fit or not on the new fuselage is one of the problems. As we'll see. We'll find out whether they fit or not, or what we have to do to these. But they're usable the way they are. Nothing wrong with them. These are the short ends, and this is the one that attaches to the landing gear, the rear landing gear attach point, and it's fine. The bolt is actually even not in too bad a shape on that. Now you have to grind the heads of the bolts off, a portion of it, the hex off of it, to get it to fit in there, to slide in on that. But that one's still got some dirt and stuff on it, even after soaking in gasoline for a couple of days. And this one's got a little bit of, this is the hanger bolt here. It was not stainless steel, and it's showing some rust there. And this is for the elevator bungee. This is one that attaches to the rear vertical fin post, and then the bungee cable goes up through it and then out and attaches to the elevator. And you see it's pretty rusty. That pulley was rusted in there for quite a while. It's got a little sawn in there a little bit, and I don't know, the bracket may be able to clean it up and reuse it. It'd have to be cleaned up before we can see. And I think with this bracket, it may be okay to sandblast it, but it's right on where it might use electrolysis to clean this up instead of sandblasting. Electrolysis doesn't remove any material from the base metal here. It works to clean it up a little better, where sandblasting is going to erode away some of the base metal. So that's a question on that. The pulley's definitely foobarred, but I've got a new bracket to put in the new airframe, so it's not a big deal. It's not a priority. This is the bracket that the trim wire attached to. This one goes up on the vertical, well, not the vertical fin, but the stringer that comes back on the top ventral portion of the fuselage, and then the cable goes through it, and for the trim cable. And it's just aluminum brackets here, and one of these has been chopped up pretty. It's in okay shape. The pulley is worn, but it was a worn out pulley when it was put on there, because that just had a piece of wire going through it. It didn't have a cable, and you can see the cable marks in there where the cable wore on there. But this is a pretty crappy piece, and it was pretty crappy when it was put on there. There's no corrosion on it or anything. It was just a butchered out piece from from whoever put the airplane together. So anyway, but that pulley doesn't matter because it's just a piece of safety wire goes across that. It's not really a big deal. It just rides across that. So anyway, that pulley would probably be okay, but I've got new pulleys and new brackets for that one. These are the U-bolts for the float attach fittings, the rear float attach fittings. This one's got a little rust on it. It can be cleaned up. Got a little bend in it. They kind of do that. That's the 3/16 one. This one was for the other side. And then these are the side ones here. So they're still usable. These are stainless steel, it looks like. This one's probably the original steel. Have to clean it up to see. But and then this one is it looks like it's galvanized. I don't know, but it's in better shape than this one. But I replaced a couple of these one time, so I don't remember which ones I replaced. This is the attachment for the lower elevator, where it attaches the cable here attaches to the lower elevator. And there's a lot of metal in that. That's pretty good meat in that. And I'd had it apart before, about probably 10 years ago, 8 or 10 years ago, and cleaned it up and repainted it. You can see it was powder coated with gold paint, and so I did that. It's pretty rusty. Yeah, there's some material where it's flaked here, flaked off pretty good here. Have to clean it up to really tell whether it could be reused or not. I don't like reusing them when that rust gets that deep in them, because there's almost no way to stop the rust from coming back when it's got into the grain like that and pitted. The turnbuckle there is going to be okay. I was worried that they might be beyond salvage, but it's going to be okay. Of course, the little clevis bolt there is all crap, but there's the other. This is the upper elevator attach, and again, it's kind of rusty around where it was in the elevator. Otherwise, it doesn't look too bad, except right here where this bungee spring rode on it, and it's hogged out that hole a little bit there. So in my opinion, I wouldn't put that on an airplane that was being rebuilt or anything. It might be okay to put back on an airplane that's going back in service, but for a while, but need to be replaced. And that the bungee spring is actually still good. It looks kind of crappy, but it's actually still good. There's no rust on it or anything. So, except for right back here where it was, oh, there's a little notch rubbed in that where it rubbed on this metal right here. So that disqualifies it. So, and again, the turnbuckle there is in good shape. Nothing wrong with that at all. These are little sleeves that go in over the longeron tubes and underneath the U-bolts for the rear float attach fittings. And they're kind of rusty, but they can be cleaned up and reused. They're not bad. They're not interground. They're just got surface rust on them. There's no real pitting in them or anything. So those are usable. This is the trim cable. Now some of the pulleys on the trim cable were froze up, and so the cable was just sliding back and forth on those pulleys. But inspection of it, I don't really see any flattened or worn cable on there. So that's would be usable, reusable. This is the bracket. This is the spring where it attaches to. They call it a bungee or whatever. And actually the spring is in okay shape. It's kind of got a little rust on it and stuff, but it's not real pretty. But of course this clevis pin that it hooks into is pretty rusty. This bracket right here for that pulley is kind of rusty, but I don't see any real pitting or anything on it, so that's probably reusable. And this was one of the only pulleys in the back of the airplane there that would still pivot, so it's actually still turning. So anyway, all in all, I'd say clean that bracket up and paint it and replace that clevis pin, and clean up that spring a little bit, grease it up, and that could go back in the airplane. I've got new parts for the new airplane, so I don't have a new trim cable, so I have to look at that. I'm going to look at it real close. I'll put it under the magnifying glass and go over it real close to see whether I'm going to reuse it or not. Now, these are the pulleys that came out of the flap system, and most of them are actually turn real good. The bearings in them are free. A little bit of overspray on this one on the pulley, but it's actually in pretty good shape. Not bad at all. I've got one of them that's got, the pulley's got a little bit of drag in it, where some of the balls are dragging just a little bit. As I turned it, it kind of went away. Well, I'm not sure which one it was, but those could be reused. I would replace the one that the bearing's dragging in, but the rest of them can be reused. And in fact, these might be the original ones out of the airplane. I noticed they'd been used. Well, you can see the edge of this pulley here where it's worn. It's not quite sharp there, but it was definitely not a new pulley when it went back in the airplane. So. And a flap handle. I had it out a few years ago, several years ago, cleaned it up and powder coated it, and it's still in good shape. The only thing, there's a little bit of rust on this pivot tube on the ends of it here. Those are chromed. And the only thing wrong with this is that it's too short for the new fuselage. And what they in the STC for the fuselage, you got to get a longer pivot tube here to put in, and then make a bushing out of another piece of tubing this size to put in here to fill in the space. So this can be reused. This is the front pulley, trim pulley. It's a double pulley, and it was pretty well greased up, gunked up, but after soaking it for overnight in some solvent, we got most of there's still a little bit of crap in here in these notches, but it's actually in fine shape. There's no marks on it, nothing wrong with it at all. It's totally serviceable, totally reusable. I don't see a whole lot of difference between this one and the new one that I just put in. You know, there's a little bit of marks here where it's had some dirt crap probably embedded in the grease and where it spun around, and it polished it up a little bit and got a few circles in it and stuff, but that doesn't affect it at all. There's nothing wrong with it, period. This is the pin that it pivoted on, that it was stuck on. The pin turns in the bracket, and the pin actually still has the CAD plating on it all the way around, even on the outside end here, but you can see where it run through the bushing on the airframe. It's worn pretty good there. You can feel a pretty good indentation in here on this forward one, or this one it would be on the inside of the airplane. The one on the outside, it's just rough. You really don't feel any. With a fingernail, you really can't feel any. Yeah, a little bit of a ridge right there, not much, but this one's got a pretty good groove in it there. So that, there's plenty of meat in that, and a guy could reuse it, but I would replace that. Now we get to the good stuff here. Oh, this is the tube, the rear tube for that the elevator or the horizontal stabilizer pivots on in the rear of the airplane. And I'd put a grease insert on that bushing a few years ago, and we've been greasing it religiously, and it was turning pretty good. So I thought and it all came out pretty good, and I thought it would be real good shape. But you can see where it's rusty, where the chrome is flaked off here, and it's rusty here. Now, the outside edges of this is where it was inside the tube right here, and where the grease insert actually would pumping fresh grease in it all the time, but you get moisture buildup in there too. But the outside ends of it here, where it was inside the horizontal stabilizer tubes, that they're real good shape. So, but I don't trust these parts that come from this parts supplier. I've had a lot of brand new parts that were painted up real pretty, and you take the paint off of them and they've got rust underneath them. So it's hard to tell how well this piece of metal was prepped before it was chromed. And the chroming is not very thick on it. It's a real thin chrome job. So anyway, that piece is not going to go back into any airplane that I've got. This is a trim yoke, and I've got it cleaned up. This is the bungee wire here that goes around to the back, and I still got a little bit of grease on here, but once I cleaned it up, you can still see the stamp marks and stuff on it. It's not in too bad a shape, except for right here where it pivots on that. Where is that piece? Anyway, that piece that the tube fits into, the, I forget what that thing's called. Anyway, that's worn in pretty good right there. But there's a lot of meat there, and the hole, I don't see that it's been ovaled or any out around. Actually, that may be machined in there like that. That one almost looks like it's machined in there like that. So if that's the case, there's nothing wrong with that at all. The threads are still good and tight in it, and it's interesting, it's got lead-in bushings on there, and the threads only go through this portion of it, whereas the new one from Dakota Cub, the threads go through the whole width of the yoke. Anyway, that I would say is serviceable. This is the rear trim pulley, and it's got a little bit of scoring on it here where I don't know what happens. This thing has a tendency to freeze up, get rusty in there, because it just sits inside of a steel bushing, and this portion here sits inside of a steel bushing. So, and a steel part inside of a steel bushing, and it have a tendency to get rusted up. So that may have been banged on a little bit to get it out of there, or maybe, well, I know I had to get this to slide off there, I had to use this and this as a puller. I used the screw portion of this to push down on the yoke, or on everything, to push that off. So that may have happened then, but I'd clean those things up and reuse that's not a problem. There's still a little bit of dirt in there in the groove, but all in all, it all looks pretty good. Now the control of the jack screw, now that's the jack screw. Now that's a different can of worms there. You can see it's rusty up here, and the top portion here is rusty, and we kept a lot of grease on this thing. So but this portion here fits in the bushing on the tail of the airplane on the tower, and then this portion here just goes through a steel bushing, and this has got some definite obvious wear on it. That's reduced size right there, and that shank where it went through that bushing from what it was, where that pulley mounts onto it. And that's just from wear from it rusting and then turning inside that bushing. So that bushing, by rights, that bushing should have a bronze bushing or brass bushing in it or something. Same with this upper one. Now, there's a little cavity in the top of this, and I thought it might be a good idea to put a piece of felt in there and drill a hole through here, put a piece of felt in there, and keep that filled up with oil, so it would just gradually wick down in there and lubricate that where it turns. But I could see that would be a problem on people with airplanes, with wheeled airplanes, where you're running off the runway in the dusty conditions, because the dust then would cake into that. But it would sure save a lot of wear and tear on that upper bushing, and that lower bushing there, that definitely should have a oilite bushing in it instead of just being steel on steel. But this piece here, you could run it through the wire brush and clean it up, but with this reduction in size down here, I wouldn't put that back in another airplane. The threads are not worn on it. They weren't sloppy at all in the thing, but the rust on it and this reduced size down here is enough to red tag it for me. So that's kind of it on the autopsy, necropsy, or whatever. So basically, after 15 years or in salt water, there's not any pieces on that thing that I would count on reusing. I've got a few pieces there, the fuel lines, a couple of them that we've got all up in the basement. I haven't looked over yet. A couple of them are in good shape. Other ones have got some surface corrosion on them. They're aluminum. And some of them had steel fittings on them, because they just used regular automotive style fittings on these things a lot, and got steel fittings on that aluminum, and those are pretty rough shape. Throttle control I cleaned up, that it's going to be reusable. And the fuel selector valve was actually in good shape. There's nothing wrong with the fuel selector valve, so that could have been reused. Control cables, most of the ends on those that were inside the fuselage, most of them are reusable after being cleaned up, except for the one that connects into the ailerons, where it connects underneath the torque tube in the belly there. That was in pretty bad shape. Most everything that was in the tail is pretty much crap. I wouldn't count on reusing any of that. Most of the pulleys and the lower pulleys are all in bad. The trim pulleys, elevator pulleys, rudder pulleys were all pretty bad. The exception to that is the flap pulleys. Hey, that's again, it does it on the old airframe.